Church's Chicken has been through quite a bit. In many ways, they were pioneering in the fast food industry, successfully growing to about 1,500 locations before encountering a tremendous number of issues that quickly led to them being part of a bankruptcy in 1991. I will be going deeper into those issues, but on the upside, that bankruptcy was followed by an impressive comeback. In the following decades, they have improved and grown their business to a point where, right now, as I say this, things are looking promising. They've been consistently opening new restaurants, currently up to about 1,700, raising the sales of their existing ones and just overall improving the brand and the customer's perception of it. If you haven't been there, they serve fried chicken, historically a direct competitor to KFC or Popeyes, the big distinction being that it's not Kentucky style or Louisiana style, it's Texas style. In fact, about a third of their restaurants are outside of the United States in 26 different countries, and for those, they have commonly chosen to brand themselves as Texas Chicken. I believe the reason being that they don't want to give the appearance of having any sort of religious affiliation, which is true. Though you do have to admit that it's kind of funny how between the two chicken-based fast food restaurants called Chick-fil-A and Church's Chicken, Chick-fil-A is the one that's religious. Anyways, today I'm going to be taking a look at the incredible rise, fall, and rise again of Church's Chicken, and because there's been so much going on with them over the years, I think it would be helpful to tell the story by going through each of their various owners. First off, it's called Church's Chicken simply because it's the name of the person who started it. George W. Church had spent his career selling incubators. Those are those machines that maintain the ideal temperature and conditions for hatching a chicken egg. Well, in 1952, at age 65, he saw an opportunity. The American population was driving their cars and on the go more than ever, so he figured that he can take advantage of that in a way that was familiar to him. He did it by opening a small restaurant in San Antonio that only sold fried chicken and only offered it to go. It was meant to be a high volume, low margin concept, meaning that he would sell a lot of chicken but only make a little bit of money from each sale. He attracted customers by setting low prices, 49 cents for 2 pieces of fried chicken and a roll. He cooked the chicken right in front of their window, allowing the public to see, and by locating it directly across the street from the Alamo. Remember that this was during the early days of the fast food industry, so there was some creative thinking going on there. After 4 years, he was up to 4 locations that had recently expanded their menu a tiny bit to also include French fries and their now famous jalapenos. And that leads me to their first change in ownership. It's a sad one because that year, George Church died and control of the company was transferred to the rest of his family, but his son, who went by the name Bill Church, became the main person in control. This is when they adapted their longtime strategy of focusing their restaurants on low-income urban areas, which makes perfect sense based on their original model. I mean, if you're looking to sell a lot of chicken at low prices, of course, you're going to go somewhere with a lot of people that don't have a lot of money to spend. And as a bonus, another motivation behind that strategy was the fact that those were the areas typically neglected by KFCs, so they weren't nearly as competitive. They found their place in the market, and by 1969, it had grown to about 20 locations, now reaching outside of San Antonio, though I believe still entirely in Texas. We can see how they were moving forward here. I would say an impressive start to this company, but the next change of ownership is where everything accelerated. Maybe you see where this is going. In 1969, they were sold to the public on the stock market. The money they raised from the sale quickly helped them become a national brand, opening hundreds of restaurants across the country and becoming the second largest chain of fried chicken restaurants behind only KFC. There's obviously so much more that could be said about this time, but to keep it simple, they continued using similar strategies to attract customers throughout the 1970s and continued growing to about 1,500 locations by the middle of the 1980s. And that is when everything started going bad. The second half of the 1980s was an absolute nightmare for Church's Chicken, so I've put together a new list outlining some of the biggest reasons behind their trouble. The first one I have is expanding too quickly. They were so concerned with opening new Church's Chickens that they may have pushed forward in some questionable areas. Remember, it's a business based on high volume, so a new restaurant has to sell a lot of chicken for it to be successful, and for many of them, that just wasn't wasn't the case. Starting in 1985, their overall sales were falling each year, and by 1988, they were losing money. Another likely factor was their changing leadership. Trust me, everyone's going to get a headache if I get into all the specifics of it, but many of the top positions just kept changing. Many of the leaders weren't getting along with each other, some of them were undoing changes made by others before them, and the company lacked a consistent vision. Another issue was all of these other fast food chains that they were trying to operate. They started a hamburger chain called GW Juniors that grew to over 60 locations before closing in 1982. They opened a Mexican restaurant called Charo's. They acquired an upper-scale competitor called Ron's Crispy Fried Chicken to try to expand their reach into the higher-income suburban markets. I don't believe any of it was too successful in the end, and it definitely divided their attention. I'm trying to go through these fast. Another potential reason was the public's perception. There's a lot tied into that, but the interesting one here is this crazy rumor going around in the black community saying that Church's Chicken was actually owned by the KKK, and they were putting stuff in their food that made black people unable to have children. Now, that's untrue, of course. Please don't go spreading that rumor to anybody else, but that can have an impact. It's questionable if it ever actually directly hurt their sales, but there was a lawsuit from one of their franchisees who claimed that they should have been told about that rumor before doing business with them. I don't know, the whole thing's weird, but it certainly wasn't a positive thing for them. My final reason behind their struggles is by far the most impactful. It is the fact that they were bought by Popeyes. So let me go ahead and add that to my other list as well, and this is another sad one because I would rank this one up there as one of the worst acquisitions of all time. I'm actually amazed that it didn't kill both of the chains. Now, I've already talked about this in a previous video about Popeyes, so I recommend watching that one if you want more details or if you want to hear from the Popeyes point of view, but the fact is that in 1989, Al Copeland, the head of Popeyes, tried to take advantage of Church's struggling position by purchasing them for something like $400 million. That amount, by the way, had to be borrowed at a high interest rate. In court documents filed at the time, Popeyes expressed that their intention was to sell 440 Church's chickens, convert 303 of them into Popeyes restaurants, close 250 of them, and keep only 92 of them open, which would have effectively reduced the brand to about 6% of their previous size. They struggled to make that happen, but I think it shows how they pretty much just wanted to suck the life out of Church's to help grow the Popeyes brand. In reality, they fired 12% of Church's staff, including the top management, closed about 100 of them, unsuccessfully tried to sell many of the company-owned locations to franchisees, unsuccessfully tried to convert many of them to Popeyes, and upset many of the existing franchisees in the process. I don't know what else to say. No one benefited from this. The two companies clearly did not integrate together well at all, so in 1991, that combined company couldn't keep up with their debt payments and was forced to file for bankruptcy. So I think that's a pretty good explanation of the rise and fall of Church's Chicken. I'll admit that up until this point, this has been a depressing video, so I'm happy that we're finally getting to the comeback. The next owner of Church's Chicken was thankfully much better than the previous one. Through the bankruptcy court, the creditors that had loaned Copeland the money for the ill-fated acquisition became the new owners of both Popeyes and Church's and used them to establish a new company called America's Favorite Chicken Company. I like that name because it has so much confidence, calling yourself America's Favorite Chicken Company, but it was later shortened and changed to AFC Enterprises. The immediate changes that they made to sort out this whole disaster was to move their headquarters from New Orleans to Atlanta, separate the operations and management of the two companies as much as possible, and maybe most importantly, they brought in a new CEO, Frank Ballard, who had recently implemented some effective turnaround efforts over at Arby's. For Church's specifically, they invested millions of dollars into remodeling restaurants to try to reverse that negative reputation. They reached out to the franchisees to try to improve the relationships that had been destroyed from that previous ordeal. They added new menu items, including their famous honey buttered biscuits. They started opening new restaurants again, many of which were in creative, low-cost locations, like the ones that they combined with White Castle restaurants. They had similar demographics and suppliers. Efforts like those helped them grow back up to 1,500 locations within about 10 years, and around that time, they even updated the branding and the logo into the one that I think most of us better recognize at this point. For AFC Enterprises, in the late 1990s, their new plan was to expand beyond fried chicken restaurants. That's actually why they changed their name. In 1998, they bought Seattle Coffee Company and Cinnabon, each of which were around $65 million. But that strategy completely changed a few years later when they ran into financial trouble. The trouble was partially due to these accounting issues where they had to restate their earnings partners, there's so much going on here, I don't want to get too sidetracked, but their new plan was to refocus all of their efforts onto one brand and sell off all of the others to raise money to pay down their debts. The company that they chose, the one that they figured would be the most promising moving forward, was actually Popeyes. That's a big reason why we have so many of them today. So, at the end of 2004, they sold Church's Chicken to Crescent Capital Investments, a private equity firm, for about $390 million. From this point, I'm just gonna go ahead and finish this list. In 2009, they were sold to another private equity firm, and in 2021, it was announced that they were sold to yet another private equity firm. That one was High Bluff Capital Partners, who are also the owners of Quiznos. They say that they believe that Church's had built a long-term connection with their customers, and they felt that they could capitalize on that. Currently, they claim to have 1,700 locations, generating system-wide sales of around $1.2 billion each year, which is an all-time high. They're bigger now than they have ever been in the past. Over the past few years, they put an emphasis on digital marketing and their delivery business, which have been bringing in positive results. So, after so much struggle in the past, it seems like Church's Chicken is finally moving in the right direction. Let me know in the comments, have you ever been to Church's Chicken? Or I guess Texas Chicken if you're from anywhere outside of the United States. I realize that it's a restaurant that's definitely not for everybody, and I imagine a good portion of the people watching this will say that they much prefer KFC or Popeyes or one of the other competitors. I'm even going to put that to a vote, so check out the community tab of this channel if you want to weigh in on that or see what other people are saying. But for the people that do frequent Church's Chicken, and I know there's many of them, what do you like about them? The prices, the food, the menu, and how has that changed over the years? And any other thoughts you have about Church's Chicken, leave them in the comments. I'd like to hear what you have to say. Thank you for watching.